Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. And then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field." Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. Sapelo Island is a mystical place off the Georgia coast. It is situated right next to piratically named Blackbeard Island. The latter, I'm sure, has buried treasure stowed there by the infamous smoking pirate Edward Teach. But the former, Sapelo, has something more practical, a daily ferry. I should note that only inhabitants or registered guests are allowed to the island if you're thinking about going. The island is owned and managed by the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. I recently took a registered, guided tour of Sapelo, accompanied by some wonderful people. My wife and kids, my brother, his wife, and their kids. I highly recommend taking this tour, and I'll post a link in the episode details. It was a thrill, truly. From the boat ride to the marsh scenery to the amazing docking skills of the ferry captain who had to navigate these crazy tidal currents at a dock that, being under construction, seemed impossibly narrow. We were all impressed. There was the lighthouse, the beach, the very smell of the place. I'd love to tell it all, and perhaps one day I will get it into writing, but for this episode, I want to focus on a feeling that hit me, or let's say haunted me, on that remote island in the marshes of McIntosh. For convenience, I will refer to this feeling as my Sapelo Sentiment. Our tour guide was a wonderfully kind and interesting lady who actually starstruck us a bit because she was featured in a recent edition of the McIntosh Life magazine. She was in charge of taking roll at the mainland dock and then riding the ferry with us to make sure all registered tourers arrived safely at the island. After offloading at our destination dock, we were led to a full-sized bus to begin the tour. Now, by we, I mean my family's little group and only one other pair. Strangers to us, a nice young couple on a quest to climb every lighthouse in Georgia. Our guide, who was also the bus driver, drove us about 200 yards and then stopped. She there decided to swap us to a smaller bus, and I mean, who could blame her? The empty seats on the big bus far outnumbered the passengers. Once this swap was complete, our tour began in earnest. For our first scenic stop, our guide parked the bus at an ancient-looking graveyard. This, I think, set the stage for the Sapelo Sentiment that was later to hit me. We got out and looked at the stones, gray and solid and unmoving. They slept forever there under those old trees in that ethereal place. But this layover for us was only a short one. Soon we were off again, the bus winding its way over the narrow roads and ending up at our second stop, the town center. Now, as you can imagine, I use the term town loosely. The basic setting is just a few buildings along a marshy creek. The main attraction is a post office that you just have to see to believe. Picture one of those big New York operations with the suction tubes shooting mail from the distribution room to all parts of a building. Yes, picture that, and then think the exact opposite, and you've got it. Our tour guide / bus driver had to spend a few minutes tending to some business here. I think she was also the postmaster general of the island. But we didn't mind. It gave us time to meander around the town square, which was essentially a little garden plot, square-shaped, in front of the post office. And for the record, I'm not knocking any of this. Hey, right across from that little garden was a marsh creek with a sailboat tied to the little dock. If you know me, you know that this was my kind of place. Truly. I'd move there today if I could. After the general finished up her duties, she walked us to the town library / museum, which stood behind the post office. They'd built it off the main square of the town, probably to avoid congestion. And it was this museum where the Sapelo Sentiment really got me. If the graveyard had put the bait on the hook, the museum snagged the fish. We entered the mercifully air-conditioned room. It was filled with ecological artifacts from the island. Things like a turtle shell, a horseshoe crab, a stuffed alligator, an aquarium of miscellaneous fish, etc. Animals living and dead were everywhere. Our guide, also the museum's curator, showed us a large bone from a bottle-nosed dolphin. It struck me, somewhere deep inside, to think of this creature in its former glory, strong and beautiful, and also, my favorite part about dolphins, playful. Out in the wide ocean, the endless blue beyond, danger and adventure coldly and wonderfully swirled together, that's where it frolicked, with sharks and leviathans and all the mysteries of the deep. Yes, all that, and only to wind up here, dry and bleached white, on a shelf, on display. Something for bored kids to poke at and say, "I want a snack." The Sapelo Sentiment, which was something like vertigo and nothing like nostalgia, expanded from this one bone to the rest of the room. Like a pebble tossed on a still pond, the rings went outward, growing larger, encompassing more. I began to see things with fresh eyes. The stuffed alligator, once strong and fearsome, now frozen and taxidermied. The snake, once sly and slithering, now painted plastic. The whalebone, the great beast himself, now merely a scrap of skeleton. Now, while our guide gets us back on the bus, I'd like to take a moment and step back in time several centuries, across the Atlantic, to Europe. There, in the Middle Ages, a particular type of sarcophagus came into fashion. You can still find them on display in various museums and collections. Their Latin name is memento mori, which translates reminder of death. A memento mori sarcophagus is a two-tiered structure, with the top layer holding a sculpture of a king or the like, lying in death, but depicted in fullness and strength and power and majesty, just as a king, or anyone else for that matter, might want to be remembered. The lower tier, though, tells a different story. This second sculpture, the one on the bottom level, is sunken and bony, skeletal and decomposed, ribs and ankles eerily poking through the skin. Yes, a memento mori is a striking sight. They hit me much like the profoundly double-layered line from Percy Shelley's poem Ozymandias. Quote, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Shelley's poem's point being that these words are inscribed on the ruins of a desolate statue of a long-gone despot, once mighty, now nothing, just a rubbled rock in a dry desert. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. The memento mori, much like the sight of that dolphin bone, calls to mind in me a wonderful C.S. Lewis passage. To give it some context, he's writing about school, and specifically the sensations he felt surrounding holidays, summer break, Christmas break, etc. Lewis writes, quote, "For the first half of the holidays, term, that is the start of school, was unbelievable. We knew, would you call it knowing, that we must go back, just as a healthy young man in peacetime knows, if you call it knowing, that his hand will someday be the hand of a skeleton." That nails it, doesn't it? As always, Lewis says it best. His point here being that at the start of summer break, a kid does not truly fathom, not on any level above a vague and abstract theorem, that there will someday be such a thing as school restarting. Heck, kids nothing. This middle-aged school teacher, just at the outset of a summer break, cannot believe it either, and doesn't really want to. So too with Lewis's line about the hand of a skeleton. Can a healthy young man in peacetime conceive of it? Intellectually, yes, I think so. Viscerally, in the gut? No, not so much. Anyway, back on the bus now. Round the island our guide took us. She told us stories and facts along the way. I loved it. I'm telling you, you should really take this tour. One bit of interesting Sapelo trivia we picked up is that there is no driving age on the island. Kids get behind the wheel whenever their parents allow them, providing they can reach the pedals. Our guide, also the chief officer of the island's DDS office, assured us that it was fine. On we rolled, over little interior creeks and by the beautiful Doughboy Sound, and then to the Sapelo Lighthouse. The young couple taking the tour with us were no doubt thrilled about this stop. It was another check off the list on their Georgia lighthouse adventure. Perhaps it was their final check, I don't know. But were they more thrilled than me? I doubt it. I love lighthouses, and of course I took my kids to the top of this one. The structure was beautifully cared for, and one thing that sticks in my memory was its wooden spiral staircase. I had never seen that. All the lighthouses from my prior experiences have had iron stairs. Anyway, we made it down safely, and our guide shared some ghost stories with us as we strolled back to the bus. I don't remember what they were specifically, but no doubt the supernatural aura tossed a bit more fuel onto the Sapelo Sentiment warming within me. Rolling on again, we passed the University of Georgia research buildings, and then more to the point of this episode, we passed the majestic Reynolds Mansion. Y'all, it really is something. What a house. Fit, I'd say, to fulfill every desire of anyone with any sort of appetite for real estate. R.J. Reynolds Jr. once owned this mansion that now bears his name. He also owned the whole island paradise that it sat on and sits on. Can you imagine that? Money, money, money for Mr. Reynolds. Of course, he also had 4 wives, an alcohol addiction, and an early death. This tobacco baron died, somewhat ironically, from emphysema. And today, his upper-class mansion serves as a playground for us middle-class folks who can rent the whole thing from the Georgia DNR, reserving an island paradise for ourselves before going back to our 9-to-5 world. You know, other former tycoon estates on the Georgia coast have been humbled by a similar demotion. The middle class uses the burned ruins of Thomas Carnegie's old mansion for photo backdrops on Cumberland Island. And we underlings can stay for a few hundred per night at the Jekyll Club Hotel or one of its surrounding cottages, whereas once upon a time, only the elite of the elite were allowed. I mean, come on, y'all, the Jekyll Club is the place where the Federal Reserve was cooked up. And now it's a chill-out spot for folks with car payments and fraction stock trading apps. You know, Jesus spoke on this issue. The Bible says, and he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. Or to go back several centuries before Jesus said those words, take the words of King Solomon, one of the richest men who ever lived, as he writes in Ecclesiastes, quote, I hated all things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me, and who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish. Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This, too, is meaningless. End quote. In my previous episode, episode 5, I shared a bit about my exercise habits. And you know, maybe I do in fact work out for cardio. Or maybe it's in case I ever get recruited to be a night ninja. Again, you can get more on that subject in the previous episode. But maybe, now that I reflect on the Sapelo sentiment, it's a half-panicked attempt to stave off middle age. You may have heard this next bit before, that some theologians surmise that we will all be 30 years old in heaven. The idea being that 30 is when a human is at the top of his or her game physically. I mention this here because, well, I'm 35. I mean, I feel great, don't get me wrong, better than ever, in fact. But still, there's some quiet part of my brain thinking of the 30 years old in heaven theory and whispering, dude, you've passed that already. Psalm 90 says this, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." Or to go all the way back to Genesis chapter 4, God says to Adam, "By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return." Leaving Reynolds, we drove over to the final stop on the tour. This was the grand finale, the Atlantic Side Beach. Our guide was also the Sapelo lifeguard. There was a restroom house and a wonderfully maintained boardwalk over the dunes and to the ocean. We had an amazing walk there. And I've actually posted a picture from this part of the journey as the cover for this episode. On the beach, our kids ran and played. We ran and played. The air blew over us, breezing in off the great ocean from across the whole ancient world. The aquatic expanse where living dolphins and living whales still swim and dive and live. It was a happy day, truly. My brother wrote his daughter, my niece's name in the sand. The tide has no doubt washed it away, along with our footprints. Probably the tide had it all erased before the end of our ferry ride back to the mainland. As Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's beach poem says, "The little waves with their soft white hands efface the footprints in the sands, and the tide rises, the tide falls." That's a fact. Erased and gone. Yes, indeed. But you know something? What of it? Should a sandcastle kid despair over his work because of the inevitable incoming tide? Should a student waste his summer break worrying over the fact that it will end someday? Are y'all tracking with me on this? We do well to reframe such paradigms, and Christians know the hope, capital H, that can do just such a reframing. Think on it. What is actually buried in those Sapelo cemeteries? Or in any cemeteries? Treasures, absolutely. Treasures of more worth than what may or may not hide beneath the sands of the neighboring Blackbeard Island. But the treasure's not there, in the graves. Not really there. Jesus said, "My Father is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for to him all are alive." Did you hear that? He is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for to him all are alive. Death, the last great enemy, has been swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? And that's how we get the cross, a tool of execution. It's easy to forget that nowadays, but that's what it was. Yet now, it is the greatest symbol of hope and life. Talk about a reversal. Talk about a treasure. Look, a coming flood is frightening, sure. But it's not nearly so scary. It does not look at all the same when you're standing aboard the ark. Floods like that look entirely different from Noah's deck. Or to take another example, go read the final book in the Chronicles of Narnia. It's called The Last Battle. Focus in on that part where the heroes are forced through the stable door. Pay all attention to that stable door. Where does it lead and what does it mean? Here you are nearing the center of it all. And since we, praise God, have this hope, I will close out this episode with another bit of Longfellow verse taken from his intensely beautiful and hope-filled poem entitled A Psalm of Life, which, by the way, I give full permission to be read at my funeral. So here goes. "Tell me not in mournful numbers Life is but an empty dream. For the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. And then later in the poem, I'm skipping just a bit. Trust no future, however pleasant. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act in the living present, heart within and God overhead. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime. And, departing, leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another, sailing o'er life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing shall take heart again. Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. I want to thank you for tuning in to this 6th episode of East and West Season 5. There's only one installment left in this season, the season finale. On that note, I'll say here a fun fact about East and West. Of all the episodes I've ever released, the one that has received the overwhelmingly highest number of listens was also the one and only episode that was a fictional short story that I wrote. I think this validates something that I've tried to make plain in Season 5, that human beings are drawn to stories. We are moved by stories. And frankly, we need stories. That old episode, the one that got so many listens, was the finale of Season 2, which has since been archived, sorry. But as always, if you're interested in any of my archived episodes, simply contact me through my website, westyoungwriter.com, and I'll be happy to release them to you. To be honest, I would leave all my episodes live online, but I'm just so dissatisfied with the sound quality of those early episodes with that old microphone and editing software I used. I just can't bear it. But anyway, contact me if you'd like to give them a listen. All I'll say right here is that for the Season 5 finale, the one that is coming at you next, it is a fictional short story that I wrote that has never been released. It's an exciting ride, and one that I think will tie together and contextualize, lending purpose to the various themes of Season 5, and will do so better than any sort of essay or exposition or explanation could do. I hope you'll give this story a listen, and until then, live fully, everybody.